घरों बैठे हो मैम क्या कर रहे हैं
जी
घरों बैठे हो क्या कर रहे हैं
हाँ Assalamu alaikum students. So today we are going to do thyroiditis and goiter. Okay. So if there are any questions, you can write me in your inbox here, or you can write me in your WhatsApp group. Okay. So yesterday we started with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and I told you there are other types as well: Hashimoto's subacute lymphocytic granulomatous thyroiditis, known as dequebrance, and renal thyroiditis. Achha. Okay, I have told you about Hashimoto's thyroiditis, that it was diagnosed by Hashimoto's in 1912, and they described it as a painless goiter with intense lymphocytic infiltrate in young females, ranging from 35 to 65, young to older females, and he gave it a name of stoma lymphomatosum. I also told you that the pathogenesis is that it is an autoimmune disease in which autoantibodies are seen against thyroglobulin and thyroid peroxidase. And the mechanism is that polymorphism in immune regulation associated gene are seen, cytotoxic T lymphocyte associated antigen 4 and protein tyrosine phosphatase 22. And these patients are also susceptible to other autoimmune disorders. Then I told you there are three mechanisms by which thyroid follicular cells are going to be destroyed by CD8 lymphocytes, which destroy the thyroid follicular cells, then cytotoxic CD4 lymphocyte, which produce interferon gamma, which lead to destruction of follicular epithelial cell by recruiting or activating macrophages. And number three mechanism by binding of antibody antigens that will destroy the follicular epithelial cells. Then we were doing the morphology, and I've hurriedly finished the morphology, which I'm going to repeat. The gland on gross examination is going to be diffusely enlarged. Capsule is intact and well demarcated from surrounding structure. Cut section is pale yellow, tan, firm, and nodular. Microscopically, what you are going to see is a very characteristic picture. There is extensive infiltration of thyroid parenchyma by lymphocyte, and lymphocyte also form germinal centers. And these germinal centers contain small lymphocytes with plasma cells. Thyroid follicles are atrophic, and some of these epithelial cells change into Hurthal cell. Hurthal cell changes that the cells become large, eosinophilic, and they have a nucleus which is shows slight variation, but they are not malignant cells. Okay, they are benign cells, but they show a Hurthal cell change, which are large eosinophilic cells with abundant cytoplasm. Interstitial connective tissue is abundant as well. So this is the gross appearance of a thyroid in the Hashimoto's thyroiditis. You can see whitish areas, and these are brown colored filled areas. The whitish areas show the gland. Microscopically, I'll tell you, this shows the gland is infiltrated by huge lymphocyte collection. This is a germinal center, and you can see follicles, atrophic follicles, and replacement of thyroid parenchyma by lymphocytic infiltrate. Here you can see a more prominent germinal center, pale area, and then surrounded by mature lymphocyte. These are the remaining thyroid follicles. In the next slide, I'll show you this. These are the Hurthal cells. These follicular epithelial cells, they become large, eosinophilic, and they have abundant cytoplasm. They are called Hurthal cell chain, and this is the colloid material, and this is a lymphoid follicle. Out of these three slides, one of these slides will be your OSPE slide, and this is very important. So this is just somebody has made that Hashimoto stands for all this. You can read it on your own. So next we will go to clinical course. The patients, they present with paleness, swelling of the thyroid, and these are mostly female who presents with hypothyroidism around 35 to 45 years old. Sometimes it is even seen in the younger females. Thyroid enlargement can be localized or it can be diffuse. In some cases, where just I told you yesterday, it starts with a clinical manifestation, starts with the thyrotoxicosis, and this is called heshitoxicosis. This heshitoxicosis is because of destruction of thyroid follicles. Much hormones are released into the circulation, producing signs and symptoms of hyperthyroidism. During this phase, T3, T level, 4 levels are going to be elevated, but later on, T3 and T4 levels are going to fall. Patient will go into hypothyroidism, and thyroid stimulating hormone is also going to increase. Okay, so you should know if the examiner asked you what is Hershey toxicosis, you should know what is Hershey toxicosis, as I've really told you right now. So next, individuals, these are also at, they can also develop other autoimmune disorders or malignancies who are suffering from Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Other autoimmune disorders which can be seen in them are type 1 diabetes mellitus, autoimmune adrenalitis, systemic lupus erythematosus or SLE, which we have done in third year, myasthenia gravis, Sjogren syndrome, B-cell lymphoma within the thyroid gland can develop in patients suffering from Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and these people are also at increased risk of developing of thyroid papillary carcinoma. So these individuals are at increased risk of developing other autoimmune disorders or lymphoma, which is B-cell type, or papillary thyroid carcinoma. The laboratory investigations I've told you in the yesterday's lecture as well, but I'm again going to repeat. Low levels of T4 are seen, free T4 and T3 levels are also low. Increase in the level of thyroid stimulating hormone are seen. Serum of these patients have autoantibodies. These autoantibodies are against thyroglobulin and thyroid peroxidase. Radioiodine uptake is going to be patchy. It's only be present when the normal follicles are left. Fine needle aspiration cytology is taking out of the cells to syringe and seeing them under the microscope for cytological examination. You can see the typical Hürthle cells in the cytological smears, as well as lymphocytes are also going to be abundant. Okay, if this is seen in a thyroid smear, then we will label it as most probably of Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Histopathological examination of the surgically removed thyroid tissue is also done. Okay, I have told you the Gaussian microscopic picture. So these are the lab investigation. Next, thyroiditis is subacute lymphocytic or painless thyroiditis. Subacute lymphocytic thyroiditis or painless thyroiditis, it comes to the clinical attention by mild hyperthyroidism and goitrous enlargement of the gland. Goitrous enlargement means a huge enlargement of the gland can be seen. It is also seen in middle adult females. I've already told you that thyroid neoplasms and thyroid goiters and thyroiditis are more common in females as compared to men. So subacute lymphocytic thyroiditis is also seen in young to middle-aged adult females. It can be seen in the postpartum females in 5% of cases, where it is called postpartum thyroiditis. After the postpartum means after the delivery of the child, the patient will present with an enlarged thyroid gland, and this is called postpartum thyroiditis. Subacute and postpartum thyroiditis are part of autoimmune disorders or autoimmune thyroiditis. In many patients suffering from subacute lymphocytic painless thyroiditis, circulating anti-thyroid peroxidase antibodies are also present, and they have a family history of other autoimmune disorders as well. Hypothyroidism is seen in 1/3 of cases. So subacute lymphocytic painless thyroiditis patient presents with hypothyroidism, but hypothyroidism was also seen in 1/3 of cases, and it is also a immunological basis. And after postpartum, if thyroiditis occurs, it is called postpartum thyroiditis and seen in only 5% of female after the postpartum. On the gross examination of subacute lymphocytic painless thyroiditis, grossly thyroid appears normal except for mild symmetrical enlargement. Microscopic appearances, lymphocytic infiltration with large eminent center within the thyroid parenchyma is seen with patchy disruption and collapse of thyroid follicles. So again, you are going to see lymphocytic infiltrate with the destruction of thyroid parenchyma. But why you are not calling it a Hürthle, because you are not calling it a Hashimoto's thyroiditis, because other autoantibodies are absent from serum, and we do not see Hürthle cell metaplasia or Hürthle cell change and fibrosis under the microscope. That's why it's given a different name, or subacute lymphocytic painless thyroiditis. The clinical features in these patients are, they present with a painless goiter, which transitions from hyperthyroidism to hypothyroidism, as I've already told you. Overt hypothyroidism develops in these individuals after 10 years of suffering from subacute lymphocytic painless thyroiditis. Okay, I hope it is clear. Okay. So microscopic picture is quite the same, except we do not see Hürthle cell change and fibrosis. And grossly, they can have huge enlargement or they have small symmetrical enlargement. Next is the granulomatous thyroiditis. Granulomatous thyroiditis, the other name is known as dequebrance thyroiditis. It is also seen in females between 40 to 50 years of age, and this has a viral, it is triggered after a viral infection. This is a viral history underneath, which triggers the granulomatous thyroiditis. The patients who develop granulomatous thyroiditis, most of them give a history of previous upper respiratory tract viral infection before the onset of thyroiditis. This thyroiditis as a seasonal incidence peaks in summers. Many cases have been reported after the mumps, measles viral infection or adenoviral infection or Coxsackie viral infection and other viral infections. So mostly granulomatous thyroiditis is seen in young females in 40 to 55 years of age, and they have a history of upper respiratory tract infection before the having thyroiditis, and sometimes it is seen after infections with mumps, measles viral infection or adenoviral infection, Coxsackie, and other viral infections. Okay, the immune response is virus associated, but not an autoimmune response. So autoimmune, you know that when antibodies are formed against your own self antigen, that is autoimmune. But when antibodies are formed against the viral, they can cross react with thyroid tissue, so immunological basis is there. But this immune response is against the virus, not against your self antigen. So there is a difference in pathogenesis between Hashimoto's thyroiditis and granulomatous thyroiditis. Morphologically, in granulomatous thyroiditis, the gland is going to be enlarged, and initially capsule is adherent to the surrounding structure. Cut section, involved areas are formed to yellow-white and stand out from brown normal thyroid tissue. If you see the, sorry, I don't know where the cross slide has gone. So I will put it before I will upload the lecture. So in the gland is enlarged initially and capsule is adherent to the surrounding structure, and on cut section it is formed yellow to color when stands out from the brown normal thyroid tissue. Microscopic examination in the early stages, you can see scattered follicles are disrupted and they are replaced by neutrophils forming micro abscesses. So follicles are disrupted. You cannot see any follicles. You can see this neutrophilic infiltration forming an abscess in the form of early stages of granulomatous thyroiditis. Later on, the aggregates of lymphocyte and macrophages and plasma cells are seen with collapsed thyroid follicles. Multinucleated giant cells are also seen, including pools of colloid, giving the name of granulomatous thyroiditis. So early in this lesion, we are seeing microabscesses, which are formed by neutrophils, and there is going to be disruption of thyroid follicles. Later on, aggregates of lymphocytes, macrophages, and plasma cells can be seen. Multinucleated giant cells are also seen, including pools of colloid, giving the name of granulomatous thyroiditis. Okay, so this is the abscess formation in the early stages of thyroiditis. Again, this is the, you can see lymphocytic infiltrate along with macrophages and giant cells. So this is granulomatous inflammation, giant cells and lymphocyte, partially destroyed follicles are seen. These are partially destroyed follicles which are recognized by pinkish material in them, and this is an hematoxin and eosin stage. This is a later stage of the disease. But later on, this is again the high part of the same slide. Later on, you can see these well-developed giant cells enclosing the colloid material in them. So that's why we can cause them granulomatous thyroiditis. I hope it is clear. So this microscopic picture is very different from that of Hashimoto's thyroiditis. In the later stages of the disease, a chronic inflammatory infiltrate and fibrosis replace the foci of injury. Okay, later after the formation of granulomas, all of this is going to be replaced by fibrosis, and chronic inflammatory infiltrate is only present. The clinical course of the disease is like this. Patient experiences pain and thyroid enlargement, and increase in the T3, T4 levels are seen with a low thyroid stimulating hormone level. Recovery of these patients usually occurs within 6 to 8 weeks, and thyroid function test becomes normal. Some patients develop hypothyroidism in 10 years' time. When the patient has normal thyroid function test, the patient is said to be in a euthyroid stage. Okay, euthyroid stage is said is the term used when the patient is having normal thyroid function test. In hypothyroidism, T3, T4 levels are low, but TSH levels are high. But in hyperthyroidism, T3, T4 levels are going to be high and TSH level is going to be decreased. So in cases of granulomatous thyroiditis, there is going to be hyperthyroidism and later patient becomes euthyroid. Sometimes these patients develop hypothyroidism after 10 years. Okay, so this is about granulomatous thyroiditis. Next is renal thyroiditis. I'm just going to just give a one line about renals. It is characterized by fibrosis of the thyroid and adjacent neck structure becomes fibrosed and thyroid gets attached to adjacent neck structures. The differential diagnosis can include a thyroid carcinoma in which if the carcinoma invades the adjacent structure, it becomes adherent to that. Okay, so the importance of renal thyroiditis is that we have to differentially diagnose it from carcinoma of the thyroid. Next. Next is the Graves' disease. Graves' disease and Hashimoto's thyroiditis are very important. They are your examination point of questions. They are also your questions for the Viva. The OSPE slide, I've told you the OSPE slide can be of Hashimoto's thyroiditis. I have given you 4 slides of Hashimoto's. Anyone can appear in your OSPE exam. So after you come back, I'm going to give a whole big lecture for the OSPE, maybe 2 lectures, so you know the slides whatever they are important. Okay, so I'm going to give you 60 slides and out of that 60 slides you are going to have 10 slides in your OSPE. So don't. Next is the Graves' disease. Graves' disease is the most common cause of endogenous hyperthyroidism. क्या मतलब है इसका कि patient becomes hyperthyroid and becomes hypermetabolic. T3, T4 levels are high, TSH levels are low. Graves' disease is also seen in females about 20 to 40 years old. It was diagnosed by Graves in 1835. He noticed violent and long continued palpitation that is called tachycardia in females with enlarged thyroid. Graves was a physician who observed that patients who are coming to her are mostly females with young females and they have enlarged thyroid and they're also suffering from tachycardia or palpitation. So the 3 clinical findings which are called triado clinical findings which we see in Graves' disease, number 1 is hyperthyroidism with diffuse enlargement of the thyroid gland. Number 2 is infiltrative ophthalmopathy leading to exophthalmos. Exophthalmos means protrusion of the eyeball because of ophthalmopathy. And number 3 is localized infiltrative dermopathy. This is called pretibial myxedema. So I'm going to explain one by one. The triad clinical findings in Graves' disease are hypothyroidism with enlarged thyroid. Number 2 is ophthalmopathy with ophthalmos. And number 3 is dermopathy, also called pretibial myxedema. Pathogenesis of Graves' disease. Graves' disease is also an autoimmune disorder, which is the antibodies are formed against the thyroid antigens, characterized by production of autoantibodies against multiple thyroid proteins, mostly commonly against thyroid stimulating hormone receptors. So Graves' disease is also an autoimmune disorder in which case it is characterized by autoantibodies. Antibodies are produced against the thyroid antigen, especially the thyroid receptor hormone antigens. So we have TSI, thyroid stimulating immunoglobulin, is seen in 90% of the people. Thyroid stimulating immunoglobulin, it binds to the thyroid stimulating hormone receptor within the thyroid follicular epithelial cells, and it can mimic the actions of TSH as well. It stimulates the adenyl cyclase, which increases the release of thyroid hormone. That's why we see hyperthyroidism. So TSI binding stimulating immunoglobulins, they bind with the TSH receptors in the follicular epithelial cell, and it's going to have the same actions as of TSH, leading to stimulation of adenyl cyclase, which increases the release of thyroid hormone in the circulation, which produces hyperthyroidism and increased T3, T4 level in the circulation. Number 2 is TSH receptor blocking antibodies. These are seen in very few people, and sometimes if they are present, patient can present with hypothyroidism as well. But in Graves' disease, remember it is hyperthyroidism, and in Hashimoto's it is hypothyroidism. I'm repeating again because these are important topics. The genetic factors are also very important in the pathogenesis of Graves' disease. Polymorphism is seen in the same immune functional gene as in the case of Hashimoto's. CTL4A gene and PTPN22, that is cytotoxic T lymphocyte associated antigen 4 and protein tyrosine phosphatase 22 are the immune function genes in which polymorphism is seen. So I hope Graves' disease pathogenesis is clear because it is an autoimmune disorder. Antibodies are formed against the thyroid stimulating hormone receptors, and these are TSI binding immunoglobulins and TSH receptor blocking antibodies. Genetic factors are also involved, and polymorphism in the immune function genes are seen, similar to the seen in Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Next is why we are getting infiltrative ophthalmopathy. Okay, you understand the pathogenesis of increased secretion of thyroid hormone. Next is the why there is exophthalmos. Infiltrative ophthalmopathy leads to exophthalmos. Exophthalmos is protrusion of the eyeball, and it is because of increase in the retrobulbar connective tissue and extraocular muscles for the following reasons. Increase in the retrobulbar tissue का मतलब ये होता है कि the tissue which is behind the eyeball, there is increased connective tissue behind the eyeball. That's why eyeball gets protruded, and which is called exophthalmos, and extraocular muscles also become increased in size. Number one, the reason is marked infiltration of retrobulbar space by mononuclear T cells. Number two, inflammation and edema of the extraocular muscles. Number three, accumulation of extraocular matrix components like hyaluronic acid and chondroitin sulfate, and increased number of adipocytes. So in the retrobulbar area, that is the area behind the eyeball, we are going to see increased infiltration of lymphocytes, which are T lymphocytes. Inflammation and edema of the extraocular muscles are present, and there is also increase in the connective tissue matrix components, which is hyaluronic acid and chondroitin sulfate. They are deposited behind the orbit of the retrobulbar tissue, and increased number of adipocytes or fat cells can be seen as well. All these four factors contribute to the decrease in the space, and the eyeball protrudes forward, which is known as exophthalmos, and altogether it is called infiltrative ophthalmopathy leading to exophthalmos. So this is a picture which is showing the Graves' disease symptom. Exophthalmos, that is protrusion of eyeball forward. Goiter, enlargement of the thyroid gland. Patient experiences sweating. Arrhythmias and tachycardias can be seen in the heart. Nausea and diarrhea in the GI tract complex. Oligomenorrhea in females. Muscle weakness is seen. Patient have experiences tremors of the outstretched hands. Headache, weight loss, nervousness, emotional instability. So why there is weight loss? Because whenever there is hypermetabolic stage, T3, T4 are increased, it is going to lead to hypermetabolic state with the weight loss. Okay. So this is the characteristic of exophthalmos. You can see eyeballs are opened, wide open, and there is bulging of eyes, and the eyelids are retracted, and there is redness of eyes. This is exophthalmos in Graves' disease. Okay. So morphologically, in the Graves' disease, what will the appearance of the thyroid? The thyroid gland is diffusely and symmetrically enlarged due to hyperplasia and hypertrophy. Weight of the gland has become 80 grams. So gland is going to be diffusely enlarged because there is both hyperplasia of the lining epithelium and hypertrophy of the lining epithelium. Cut section of this thyroid tissue will appear as meaty and appearance of brownish in color. Microscopically, what we are going to see, the follicular epithelial cells, they are tall and they are more crowded in untreated cases. So we can see tall columnar epithelial cells which are more in number, and because they are more in number, they form papillae. These papillae are pseudopapillae because they lack the fibrovascular core in them. And these papillae are pseudopapillae because they are lacking fibrovascular core, and they project into the lumen of the follicle. Okay. The colloid which is present in the follicle is pale with the scallop margins, and lymphoid infiltrate is seen in T cell, B cell, and mature plasma cell can be seen in between the interstitium. Germinal centers can be seen as well sometimes. Okay. So on the gross appearance, you can see the thyroid is enlarged, symmetrical enlargement of the thyroid gland. Cut surface is homogeneous and appears meaty. Hyperplasia and hypertrophy of follicular cells seen in microscopic appearance. We cannot see in the gross. Okay. So in the microscopic appearance, I'm going to show you. These are the pseudopapillae. There is no core, but they are because of enlarged epithelium, they are bulging into the follicles. And this is pale colloid, which is present, thin pale colloid present within the follicle. And you can see the clearing of the colloid between the epithelium and colloid, there is clearing, and this is called scalloping. Scalloping shows there is increased hormone production and going into the circulation. So this is the microscopic picture of Graves' disease and the untreated cases. So this is hyperplastic epithelium, the arrow is pointing towards hyperplastic epithelium, and this is tall columnar epithelium, and you can see scalloping. This arrow is pointing towards scallop margins of colloid because of the colloid resorption or thin colloid. So this is seen in the cases of untreated cases. Colloid is pale with scallop margin, and T and B lymphocytes are seen as well. If we given preoperative therapy with iodine, it leads to involution of the epithelium with accumulation of colloid and blocking thyroglobulin secretion. Okay, so in the involution stage means the lining epithelium instead of tall columnar is going to be cuboidal, and colloid accumulation with accumulation of colloid can be seen within the follicles. Treatment with antithyroid drugs, which is propylthiouracil, exaggerates epithelial hypertrophy and hyperplasia by stimulating thyroid stimulating hormone secretions. Okay, so we can see either these tall columnar cells forming pseudopapillae without a core, colloid is pale with a marginal scalloping, and in the interstitium B cells and T cells are seen with that is lymphocytic infiltrate. But if we give iodine before the operation, then the involution changes, that is, the epithelium become cuboidal instead of tall columnar. And if you are treating it with antithyroid drugs, propylthiouracil, it will also lead to epithelial hypertrophy and hyperplasia by TSH stimulating hormone. This I have described you. This I have also described you the microscopic features. Again, these are the microscopic features. You can see papilla formation, and this is the tall columnar epithelial cell, and in the normal you can see flattened to cuboidal epithelial cell lining the follicles. They are forming pseudopapillae and they are tall columnar cells. These are the differences between a normal thyroid and thyroid in the Graves' disease. Okay, so changes in the extrathyroidal tissue can be seen as well. And I hope the Gaussian microscopy morphology is clear. Okay, this is your Viva and OSPE question as well. OSPE question, Viva question, and long question, SCQ. Changes in the extrathyroidal tissue is seen as well. Lymphoid hyperplasia, enlargement of the thymus in the younger patient is always with the lymphoid hyperplasia. So if there is Graves' disease in younger patient, enlargement of thymus is seen and lymphoid hyperplasia is seen in the thymus gland. Heart is going to be hypertrophied with ischemic changes, especially in people who are also having coronary artery disease underlying. Coronary artery disease we have done in CBS. Dermopathy. Dermopathy is increased thickness of the dermis due to deposition of glycosaminoglycans and lymphocytic infiltration. So in the dermopathy, as in the ophthalmopathy, there is also glycosaminoglycans and hyaluronic acid deposition. Similarly, in the dermopathy, there is deposition of glucosaminoglycans and lymphocytic infiltration, and it is mostly seen in the pretibial area, which is also called pretibial myxedema. Changes in the extrathyroid tissue in the eye, which is called ophthalmopathy. The tissue of the orbits are edematous because of presence of hydrophilic mucopolysaccharide in the retrobulbar area. Infiltration of lymphocyte and fibrosis are seen as well. Orbital muscles are edematous, later undergo fibrosis. So extrathyroidal tissue is lymphoid hyperplasia, changes in lymphoid tissue, in the heart, in the skin, and in the eye. Okay, I've described one by one. Next is the clinical course. These patients present with hypothyroidism, diffuse hyperplasia of the thyroid with the bruit due to increased blood flow in the gland. Bruit is an abnormal sound which is heard on the thyroid when you do auscultation. You are going to do in your medical wards. Ophthalmopathy is present with proptosis or exophthalmos, as I've explained you. I've shown you the picture as well. Dermopathy can be seen. I've explained you what is this. Sympathetic overactivity leads to wide staring gaze and lid lag. Ophthalmos is present leading to corneal injury. Infiltrative dermopathy of pretibial myxedema, most common in the skin on the shins, scaly and thick skins can be seen. So patient presents with hypothyroidism with diffuse hyperplasia of the gland, certain changes in the eye, which is exophthalmos with ophthalmopathy, dermopathy, sympathetic overactivity, and corneal injury can occur because of exophthalmos. Infiltrative dermopathy leads to scaly skin. The risk of other autoimmune diseases with the Graves' diseases are also there. Other autoimmune disorders can develop like SLE, systemic erythematosus, pernicious anemia, type 1 diabetes mellitus, and Addison's disease. So these are the diseases which can develop either as other autoimmune disorder with Graves' disease. These are SLE, pernicious anemia, type 1 diabetes mellitus, and Addison's disease. The lab finding or laboratory diagnosis by increasing in the serum increased level of T4 and T3, decreased level of thyroid stimulating hormones in serum, radioiodine scan shows diffuse uptake of iodine, fine needle aspiration cytology will show you at what stage we have done FNAC. If it is in a proliferative phase, there is going to be papillae formation without a core. And we can see thin colloid. This can come out in the FNAC needle. Histopathological examination of the removed thyroid tissue is also done, and treatment you are going to read on your own, but the beta blockers are given to decrease the heart condition, and rest of the treatment you can read on your own. Okay, and this is the area which is going to be covered by your medical people. So next is the diffuse non-toxic simple goiter. Okay, we have diffuse non-toxic simple goiter and we have multinodular goiter. So first I'm going to describe you diffuse non-toxic simple goiter, then I'm going to go into the multinodular goiter. In the diffuse non-toxic simple goiter, it causes enlargement of the entire gland without producing nodularity. The follicles are filled with colloid, also called colloid goiter. So when you see the patient, there is only going to be one large thyroid, there will not be multiple nodules present. And this is also called colloid goiter with diffuse non-toxic simple goiter. The other name is given as colloid goiter. It occurs in endemic and sporadic distribution. Endemic areas where the iodine is deficient, and sporadic, it can occur without iodine deficiency area. The endemic goiter. Endemic goiter occurs in those areas where the soil, water, and food supply contain less iodine. The term endemic is used when more than 10% of people are affected by this disease. Goiter is seen mostly in mountain areas of world like Indies, Himalayas, and with less iodine areas. Okay, so endemic goiter is mostly seen in those areas where there is less iodine supply in the water, soil, or in your diet. Okay, and Indies and Himalayas are the areas mostly affected. So in the patient will appear as a diffuse swelling, no nodularity. Diffuse goiter is seen in the people in this area. This is a normal thyroid and this is a enlarged thyroid. And lack of iodine leads to decreased synthesis of thyroid hormones and compensatory increase of thyroid stimulating hormone, leading to follicular cell hypertrophy and hyperplasia and goitrous enlargement. Iodine supplements have decreased this incidence of goiter. So I have told you endemic goiter is because of less of the iodine in the soil, food, and water. So in the endemic area, lack of iodine leads to decreased synthesis of thyroid hormones and compensatory increase of thyroid stimulating hormone, leading to follicular cell hyperplasia and hypertrophy and goitrous enlargement. Iodine supplements have decreased the incidence of endemic goiter. The other factors which can lead to goiter formations are goitrogenic substances in the diet. Goitrogens are dietary substances that interfere with the thyroid hormone synthesis, and most these goitrogens are vegetables like cabbage, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, turnips, cassava. They are goitrogenic. Cassava contains thiocyanate that inhibit the iodine transport in the thyroid. So those substances which lead to decreased iodine transport in the thyroid substances, they are called goitrogenic substances, and many of them are the vegetables. Okay, sporadic goiter. Sporadic goiter occurs in females where the iodine is not deficient, mostly seen in young puberty females or young adults. Goiters can result from goitrogenic substances or hereditary defects in the enzyme, or no cause can be seen. Morphologically, two phases are seen, hyperplastic phase and colloid involution phase. In the diffuse non-toxic goiter, when we do the morphology, there are two phases, hyperplastic phase and involution or colloid phase. Okay. In the gross phase, hyperplastic phase, in the gross diffuse symmetrical enlargement of the gland is seen. Gland become 100 to 150 grams in weight. Microscopically, the follicles are lined by crowded columnuses with pile and project into the lumen as in Graves' disease. Some follicles are much distended and other remain normal. In the colloid goiter involution phase, when iodine increases in the diet or demand of the thyroid hormone decreases, the follicular epithelium becomes cuboidal and the follicles become rich in colloid. These are called colloid-rich glands or colloid goiter. The gross appearance gland is enlarged, cut surface is brown, glassy, and translucent. Microscopically, you can see follicular epithelium is flattened and lined by cuboidal epithelial cells with abundant colloid in them. So this is the colloid force of the goiter. You can see these are large follicles distended with colloid and lined by cuboidal epithelium. This is also your OSPE slide as well. Clinical course. Patients, they are euthyroid, means their T3, T4 levels are normal. TSH is sometimes raised, okay? Otherwise, TSH is also going to be normal. Enlargements can produce pressure symptoms. Pressure symptoms can be seen in the trachea and esophagus. Next is the multinodular goiter. Briefly, we can say it MNG as well. Multinodular goiter is produced by recurrent episodes of hyperplasia and involution in a simple goiter, okay? The multinodular goiter appears because of the hyperplasia and involution in the goiter, which is in the repeated episodes. MNG produces most extreme thyroid enlargements. It occurs both in sporadic and endemic forms. Females are more affected than men, especially in the older age group. MNG or multinodular goiter arise because of different responses in follicular cells to trophic stimuli because of intrinsic genetic abnormalities. So why this multinodular goiter arises? It arises because the follicular epithelial cells are going to behave differently with the trophic stimuli. Activating mutation affecting proteins of thyroid signaling pathway has been identified in thyroid nodules. So there is going to be some signaling pathway defects which can be seen in TSH signaling, which are identified in this multinodular goiter patient. Morphologically, in the gross appearance, the multinodular goiter are multilobated, asymmetrical, enlarged, and can be up to 200 grams. They produce the huge masses. Multinodular goiters produce huge masses. MNG produces pressure on trachea and esophagus. Goiters can be behind the sternum as well when they can produce pressure symptoms. And these goiters which are behind the sternum are called intrathoracic goiters or plunging goiters. Okay. The cut surface of these goiters is irregular nodules containing variable amounts of brown colloid material. Areas of hemorrhage and fibrosis are seen as well cystic degeneration. So these is the picture of multinodular goiter. You can see multiple nodules are seen in the same goiter. Multiple nodules are seen and it is brownish in color in the external surface. Microscopic appearance. Microscopically, follicles are contain colloid material and are lined by inactive epithelium, and areas of follicular hyperplasia can be seen in few follicles. So mostly these are inactive epithelium, cuboidal epithelial cells containing lots of colloid in them can be seen. But in some areas, few follicular hyperplasia can be seen as well. These follicles, which are containing colloid and are lined by inactive epithelium, are divided into different lobules by fibrous tissue septa. In the older lesion, areas of hemorrhages, necrosis, cyst formation, and foamy macrophages are also seen with areas of calcification. Degenerative changes are also present, and there is no capsule present in them. So if you see the microscopic appearance, which I have just described, you can see follicles of different sizes and shapes lined by cuboidal epithelium, and then there are fibrous tissue septa as well, and hemorrhage and calcification, just as hemorrhage. Calcification is not seen, and the colloid is present within the follicles. So this is the image of thyroid. This is also your OSPE slide. Reactive fibrosis is seen. Here is the reactive fibrosis, which is divided into different lobules. एक मिनट मुझे दे दो जब तक वो नहीं आते, ठीक है? MNG thyroid showing degenerative changes. This is the hemorrhage present showing degenerative changes, and these are the thyroid follicles lined by cuboidal epithelium containing colloid. This is also degenerative changes, cystic changes seen, and you can see macrophages which are present in the cyst area. Okay, this is also MNG thyroid or multinodular goiter thyroid. Clinical course. 2 minutes और दे दो, ठीक है? Pressure symptoms. Pressure symptoms are produced because the thyroid are very enlarged and they can produce pressure or obstruction in the airway, that is in the trachea, or they can cause pressure on the esophagus producing dysphagia. Compression of large neck vessels are also seen as superior vena cava syndrome, and dominant nodule can be hyperfunctioning as well. Radioiodine scan and FNAC is helpful in diagnosis this lesion. Laboratory diagnosis, I've also written, I'm going to upload this lecture and the time is finished. Okay, you can send me your question in your WhatsApp group. Thank you. Assalamualaikum. Fine. Sorry, ma'am.